Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where in the world you are, and welcome to the TK Show. And today's guest is Dr. Ralph Mathekga, one of those political analysts who doesn't speak a lot, but when he speaks, you tend to know it's going to be something informed, I think, which is most important, and something which covers not just only South Africa, but global politics. Dr. Mathekga, thanks for joining us.
A great pleasure to be talking to you. I'm looking forward.
No, great stuff. Doc, I think for those that have just seen you, on TV here and there, and obviously read your books, and the like, because I also should have mentioned that you are an author. Just a background a bit on not everything, but just a background on just your history, because I think what people don't know is that you started in government. Hence, when you speak on government, it's not a, how do I put it? You're not taking a chance.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I've had quite an interesting career path. I don't know whether should I say it's planning or accident, but quite interestingly, I did work for National Treasury at some point. It was far back. I think it was 2008, somewhere there, 2007. I spent some time there in the expenditure planning at Treasury. I learned a lot. When I got to Treasury, I was fascinated with research. I produced documents around, a lot of planning mechanism, things such as recurrent expenditure, how do you deal with that, capital expenditure planning, adjusting those budgets. That is the technicalities that I got involved in quite extensively. I mean, every year when a government had to do their yearly budget before the Treasury announced the budget, our job there was to help the department bring the indicators, report on what they've done, what are they targeting. And that book that is called the Estimate of National Expenditure is this thick book produced by Treasury. We will help in putting together, in my division actually, we will put it together and edit it and look at the whole budget. So I do have a background in a deep understanding of budgets and how budget processes work. But I also worked as I taught far back when I was quite younger, I would say. I taught at the University of Western Cape. I was at Wits where I studied. I tutored a lot at Wits. I went on to study the US. I went to the New School where I spent quite a lot of time there, where I met very interesting scholars in the US at the New School, taught by some of the great sociologists there. The climate, you could get to New York University, NYU, the likes of Mamdani there, great Robert Chavorsky was teaching at the NYU. You could walk in, go to Columbia University, walk into a class. I remember accidentally walking into a film class at Columbia University. And I'm studying politics, and I said, let me just sit in and see how people study film. And then I will meet some of the students there who later go on and produce movies in Hollywood. And because they studied there. So I've always wanted to have a comprehensive understanding of the world. I've done research in many other areas, worked in Nigeria. I've been to Chad in the Sahel region, worked in that area, Rwanda, traveled Eastern Europe, been to Bosnia, been to Croatia, doing some work in those areas, and your South Korea and all those. So I always say, South Africa, if you look at South Africa from a distance meaning if you put it into a global perspective, it doesn't look too bad. And people tend to say, no, and I say, if you just take a global perspective, it doesn't look too horrible. You start understanding patterns and you start realizing that, of course, there are hiccups in the process of democracy. But when you look around the world, someone says that things are falling apart, you say, have you looked around? Have you really looked around? Of course, we don't want to be comparing it to that point, but I think the global perspective does help maybe to see pockets where maybe things are not as bad as they look when you have that much of a closer perspective. That sometimes a too close perspective can be narrow in a sense.
No, thank you. I think it does come out in your analysis where I think you're one of the few who always, when we look at the drama, I always call it the drama and the series that is South Africa, you tend to focus on the longer term. And you're right in saying, I always tell people South Africa for those that like policy and politics, it's a great case study. Unfortunately, we live in it, so
Exactly.
you happen to be part of the drama. But just the 2 points I think which really do stand out in the background you've given, and when we can just touch a bit on what is the technicalities of government. It doesn't come any more technical than Treasury, but you also know Treasury is not exactly a fan favorite of many. Even within the governing party, Treasury is not seen as, but just that one, the technicalities of it, and also just like you said, the international exposure of how we see South Africa. Just if you can maybe just elaborate on that, that we often don't speak about the technicalities of government.
I mean, I've done a lot of research at local government. For example, I've spent time in Free State months in Malutia Pofung. One of the things I really like a lot is I like going out there and meeting the people, because I'll be sitting here in Johannesburg, hitting the keyboard, giving analysis, saying things are horrible, and I want to take on that perspective. Why? It's when you start looking at these things more seriously as systems, something else come out. And I'm writing about the people, how they feel about it. But when you go there, you find people getting by, and you find that actually, am I imposing a story here? And why am I saying that? When you get closer to things, my experience at local government is that it is very difficult to run a municipality in terms of the technicalities. Because if you look at the systems and you look at a plethora of laws that you have to go by, the system itself, that if you look within a municipality to even start with, one of the technicalities people, I think, are not paying much attention to is a system where the municipality, the council, is both an executive and a legislature at the same time.
True.
And you are expecting them to meet accountability of themselves within that kind of a framework. So when you look at that system, you look at how complex is this system. I mean, when you start hearing somebody being an MEC in that, and you look at, okay, there is a caucus, you look at this division, and you look at how closely knit the whole thing, you realize you are facing a very complex system, to a point where I often write that if you give me a big conglomerate company, multinational, multi-billion rand company, and you give me a municipality, I'll opt to go for that company. You are going to give me an accountant in that company. You're going to give me a chief accountant, probably with a degree from Harvard or whatever university. You are going to give me a planner, someone who knows very deeply about planning in that company. You're going to give me all the resources in that company. But when you give me a municipality, what do you give me? You just give me a party manifesto and a legislation. Most municipalities have operated without a chief financial officer. And when things don't go well, because there is no chief financial officer, the reason why there is no chief financial officer is that there has not been someone with accountancy literacy or that background applying for that job because of the skill. So the same thing, I also take it to government to be saying, government systems are very, very, very complex. Having been a treasury, South Africa has got one of the most complex, sophisticated bureaucracy in government. I mean, you have got 3 spheres of government. We have got budget that starts from national, flows to province, flows to local. If you look at the financial year to even start with, you've got the one in April, you've got the one in May, you've got the one in June. So in some level of dependence of the flow of that. But at the same time, we're saying provinces should budget autonomously, local government should budget in relation to the people autonomously. But the way in which the system is flowing, you got to function within that complex system. It is the politics. It is an intergovernmental relations that is not clear. It is a legislative framework that is extensive, but it is not meshed by what you can call capacity to implement it or corresponding capacity to implement that. And what then happens? You end up with corruption. We're looking at it to be saying people are causing it. Yes, people are causing it, but the bigger part of it, it is a symptom of a poorly aligned system. I mean, look at state-owned entities in government. I'll just give an example of the complexity. The Department of Public Enterprises, it is a department under which Eskom fall. And this department sees Eskom as an implementing agency of Eskom. But the CEO of Eskom does not understand that in the function, in the language of public bureaucracy, might not understand that. And we end up saying, no, what are we dealing with? Eskom need to be on its part. Forgetting that the reason why it was formed by under the department, it is actually an implementing arm of the public, the department's mandate. Then you have the electricity department coming in. Then you have the whole bureaucracy. And I always say to people that if you really want to understand how government works, take your time and watch a British sitcom, Yes, Minister.
Yes.
How many people have seen it? I mean,
too true. It's too true.
If you take your 15 years of reading politics, you put it on Yes, Minister, you understand why there is interministerial committee after another. They never work. There is an interim report. And when you look at it, you say, this is very complex. The only way in which this thing is going to work well is if we break it into small pieces. And what does that mean? We strengthen local government, strengthen those specific areas. And you then start having a separation where there is no need for political difference to result in someone not having water, because water is supposed to be above that. So you can have politics aside. Some issues, of course, you want to build a high-speed rail. Maybe it's not it's a boutique project that has to be processed by politics. There might be differences, but we cannot have differences on water pipe. So you need to start structuring your bureaucracy in a way that you say, okay, how can I take out the bureaucracy out of performance? I mean, I worked with SALGA for many years, I think. I mean, I've helped them to develop their research strategy. I don't think they'll have a problem with me mentioning that. I believe I have a good relationship with them. And as I engaged with SALGA and local government in the past 10 years or so, a municipal manager comes and says, but there are too many laws. I spend a lot of time complying, and I will succeed in complying, but that does not mean I've achieved service delivery. So, and you and I, we want compliance. Why? Because we've been stung by corruption. We want to keep on putting more regulations. But those regulations means also hurdles of doing work. You end up being so much involved into this bureaucracy that looks like a never-ending cycle. And for me, those are going to be problems that will delay progress, whether or not you have a corruption as a symptom or a cause of some of it. So it is the complexity of this system. And at the end, I want to say, especially on the skill and all that, on various departments, on where one has been, we need to take government seriously. I have worked with people in the private sector. If people in the private sector are vetting the people they are employing in that way, particularly people who are going to be dealing with planning, client strategy in financial institution, you need to do that twice in local government. Why? Because the problem is bigger and it's more complex. So we need to reverse this thing. We need to drive more skill to local government. Someone need to do a PhD in local government and understand it as something that is much, much, much more valuable to understanding the basics of democracy at our doorstep. For me, it is that journey of, trying to teach, you get involved in research, you try to take that perspective. You look at local government in other areas. You look at how it exists in the UK. You look at how it exists across the continent in Africa, where it doesn't exist in most cases, if you like. And then you look at South Africa, you realize it's bad. You say that, but we have a system here. We have to work on it now. Because in certain areas, people who look at our local government, it is quite complex. It is the marvel in terms of structure. And we have to get it right. That is why we need to appreciate that we are dealing with a complex system here. We are dealing with a system that requires a lot of brain power here, and we need to gear up to that.
No, that's quite true. I always say, look, one of the great blessings one had is that I started at local government, and the points you are saying is, look, for a simple one, I think we touched on it, is the issue of compliance and the Auditor General. When you speak to people and when you've worked in local government, like you said, while you appreciate that an accountant wants compliance, and the system requires compliance, what they're not accounting for is at what cost in terms of service delivery? Because those that are in local government will say, look, if I do this, even though I'm giving a service, I get penalized. So you're right in saying we probably do. I like the way you put it, that we've got the basis of a system.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how can we fine tune it so that it, like what you're saying, not fine tune it only for compliance, because you're right in saying we should worry about compliance, but the key issue of, does it get the job done? And I think not too much is said about that as you expanded upon.
Exactly, and if you look at how much, because if you're within municipality, you know, I know I'm speaking from empathy. Some of your viewers might say, you know, is he taking the position? No, it's because I do understand what it means to run a municipality, to be there. And if you look at the compliance regime that they are facing, I call it a compliance regime because if you don't give someone capacity, then it is a regime, because you don't allow them to match to that. It's not a problem if you've got a necessary corresponding capacity to try to deal with that. So it results in fatigue to a point where a lot of money is going to go to consultant. Why? Just to help us get the books right. And you end up with the bigger part of the municipality money being spent on just getting the books right, but there is no service delivery. And I think it is the same thing in government. I mean, I wanted to say this so much. Have you noticed how much of the budget in communication has grown across different departments?
True, you're right.
I mean, I know. I worked in the budget, so I have to know where to look. If you want to tell me what people are doing, they can say all they say. I go and take the budget and I look at the items that are spiking. And one area where government has emphasized a lot is actually in communication. And I ask myself, if you really need to emphasize much on communication, there is something you are not doing, namely not doing. You are not doing, you're communicating. So there need to be a balance. So you look at the emphasis, the same thing that I'm going to have people coming in, help me to get my books right on auditing and everything. This is all I need. And you get that, you dedicate all your energy towards that. Throughout your work, you are trying not to violate the rules. You are not trying to be innovative on what you're doing. So it becomes quite an issue. And I think we need to look at it in realistic terms to be saying, yes, we need ethics. And if we can deal with ethics, we will go lower on the compliance regime, because ethics is actually that core of why people go into the service.
No. That's actually it's actually a brilliant opening as you put it, and it also does, because I think you're right in saying sometimes analysis we go too much to say compliance, but like you said, we don't explain to people. Listen, this, because sometimes when they say fruitless and that it's technical terms, it doesn't necessarily mean the person is corrupt. It just sometimes means they don't know how to. Like you said, if I know that I'm going to be penalized, I'd rather keep the money there. You know, the proverb of the talents. But forgetting that our system, we have a zero budgeting. So if you don't use it, it's gone. And it comes back less next time. So no, that's actually a very good opening. Now, you've touched on the technical stuff, and also in the opening, you said, listen, South Africa vis-a-vis the rest of the world, like I said, we have a basis of a system. So if we could maybe just quickly travel around the world, just we've had, I guess for those that follow global politics, and like you said you started 2008 would be the financial crash. From the financial crash, we moved to Brexit. From Brexit to Trump. And now we are either at the beginning or at the peak of the China-America. Where are we really globally in politics now?
You know, we have fragmentation. And I think that we have existed in this, we have this idea, we have had known unipolar world, you know, come from the Cold War, you've got China coming up now with the markets, they've got their own challenges within the society. And then now you've got Russia, you have had America, you have got Africa as well coming out, and you've got many coups on the side, West Africa as well. So what is the picture that you get? I think there is a lot of global fragmentation, and fragmentation is not always bad. This is where the problem is, that the way in which people look at it, they always look at it bad. Fragmentation, usually, sometimes in the system, you need some displacement for some reformulation of this, or even rebasing of the system. And I'll tell you where I think the bigger problem is happening. I mean, if you look at the West, the big problem now, look at BRICS. A lot of people, we put a lot of emphasis on BRICS. I do as well, but I'm also very critical of BRICS.
Mm.
You know, I'm very critical of it because I was a student of international trade and finance. That's what I studied at FETS, multilateral institutions and so forth, and how do they work and everything else. I do understand BRICS. And I'll tell you what is the big challenge within BRICS. The most basic thing we don't talk about in South Africa is that China has got no interest in a stable, India has got no interest in a stable China because of the Nepal crisis. No? The Nepal side there. And if you look at what is happening, the relationship between China and India, it becomes quite a bigger issue. You've got Pakistan on the other side with a problem with India. I have a privilege of meeting high commissioners. Sometimes I will meet high commissioners of Pakistan in South Africa. If people call me for a conversation, I am going to have a conversation with them. So I'm that kind of a person who will be willing to sit and talk. So you look at that, and within this very BRICS, you've got Russia as well, and us, the junior partners of BRICS, which is Brazil and South Africa. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need to know your place, because it's very much important that BRICS does not become a platform through which maybe China, Russia, and India, who are very senior and much more, have got much more global impact, then start bringing other geopolitical tensions into BRICS itself. Because I wonder, I was writing an article where I was saying it is very difficult to understand India wishing China trade and political stability, given the confrontation. Some of people don't know here that the soldiers between China and India actually murdered each other over fist fight. I think it was 2 years or so ago over the border there. Fortunately, no one got killed and all that. But all these things keep on happening. And within that side as well, China's got a very close relationship with Pakistan. Pakistan is business. China is investing quite a lot in Pakistan. At the same time, you know the historical tension between Pakistan and India. The two countries as also the tension. So you look within that region, you have got that fragmentation. On the side, you've got Russia, you've got the US. I don't think Americans are going to relent on trying to claim that that space. But I think what matters now, it is going to be where is the scene of this thing? And I think you've got global fragmentation, but there is something that is very critical when it comes to the scene. Africa is becoming a very interesting scene now. The war is being fought in Ukraine, but the impact on the African continent is highly disproportionate in terms of the physical location as to where we are. If you look at how the war in Ukraine has actually brought Africa much into that the geopolitical tensions. But the question for me is, amidst this fragmentation, I'm speaking about fragmentation within BRICS itself, China, India, Russia. At the same time, a lot of people don't want to accept that China is not interested in Russia's expedition in Ukraine. Why? Because China does not lack anything that destabilizes trade. China's got no interest in breaking apart the world trade. It is interested in dominating it. Because it works well within the Chinese within the Chinese thinking. China wants to take the battle to the US in terms of trade and push harder on that front. And amidst all this fragmentation, there is one thing that is very clear I'm seeing. Africa is finding it difficult to craft a coherent agenda. Because this is there is a lot of fragmentation. Fragmentation simply means you can shop almost everywhere. China's got a great deal of interest in Africa's market because Africa needs more dishwashers than any region possibly. I'm just giving you an example. It's a simple basic law of economic history. If you are looking into the market now, you look at our level of development, you still need more washing machines in South Africa than you need in the USA. In the USA, you might maybe repair those that are there. But the reality is that we are a great fresh market. And this war is actually coming in. War from Ukraine is coming into our region with all these implications, all this global fragmentation. The US is concerned about where are we going. The European Union is visibly concerned about trade relations as well, and the relationship we've taken, the path we've taken in relation to the war in Ukraine. So we are, and I don't like to use this phrase because you cannot tell someone who seems to not to appreciate where they are to be saying, you know, you are in a great place. You might have arrived by accident. Events might have conspired somehow to get you there. It does not mean you have made great decisions in all, but we as a region, as a country, we are in a place where we can look as to how do we redefine our engagement within this global environment as it is reshaping in this fragmentation. It makes no sense for us to commit ourselves to re-establishment of one of the polars or either way. It makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever, because it should not be part of our objective to try to help the superpowers either side regain that momentum. Ours is to be saying, with this fragmentation, perhaps we can set foot and start to say that amidst all this fragmentation, we think that condition upon which we will continue in a relationship are this and that. And I don't think we have done that, because I look at Africa now with all this fragmentation. Remember, the most time that Africa has had a problem with your exploitation, is when there was more unity that side. Global powers. I mean, the scramble for Africa is a simple thing that we sit down, you take West Africa, you take East Africa and all that. The global superpowers were in agreement on all of that. So now you are having a situation where it's a crisis now. You are having this fragmentation, geopolitical fragmentation. You've got multiple interests that are coming out now. And this thing has broken down the order that we should not be seen supporting either to rebuild. So we should be thinking much deeply about conditions upon which we can get ourselves involved. So I'm looking at it from that point of view. And then I put South Africa back into SADC region, Southern Africa Development Community region, where we are. You look at South Africa, there are great things happening within the region, no doubt about it. You've got the opposition in Malawi. I don't know, Zambia followed suit. I think there might be one or two opposition in the region. No, I think it was Kenya, of course, East Africa. But you have Southern Africa opposition that is there. In Botswana, you have got a very incredible shift. A country I'm very fascinated with. I need to travel there. It just borders the province in Limpopo. What I'm fascinated about Botswana is what you can call the dismantling of the founding elites of Botswana's democracy. I mean, as you and I are speaking, Khama is in exile.
Inverted commas,
in South Africa, he's in exile, you know. But it's not a good thing to speak. There are great political tension. But when you go deep, you look at it, you say, what is going on in Botswana? Unraveling of the established political elites. You know, you talk to people. And also what comes with that is also unraveling of the entrenched security and intelligence elites within the state. When those things start to unravel, you've got them being rebuilt. That is how the state apparatus change. That's how institutions start changing. I'm arriving at a point that I have not argued elsewhere, but I'm beginning to believe that your state and security apparatuses are some of the biggest challenge to democratization if they are not well aligned and all that. Look at what you are seeing in the Sahel region, in West Africa, and so forth. So you look at it, you look at South Africa, you look at Botswana, you look at what's going on, the ANC is experiencing in Botswana, you look at Zim, you look at Namibia as well. In the previous election, SWAPO did not do so well in the local government election. They've had some challenges there. Probably you know about the fish rot scandal involving the Icelandic Norwegian fishing tender there. That brought almost a catastrophic reputation crisis for the governing party there. But all of this thing is also showing me that there is a lot happening within the region. There are movements within local government. It's not comfortable for Zimbabwe, of course, for the ZANU-PF to maintain the stronghold. It's not comfortable. You have to deport journalists now because you just don't want to see what you have to do. It means now, if you're doing things wrong, it is becoming even more difficult to do that. So within the region, there are some excellent, interesting trends when it comes to former liberation parties, what they are experiencing, the BDP in Botswana, what's happening in Angola, Namibia, SWAPO, ZANU-PF. These parties have got a very interesting journals that they share, but they also govern the same people in this region. I'm looking at migration issues, opportunities in terms of migration, because I'm sorry, I see a lot of opportunities around migration in the region. If it can be sorted at a regional level, all member states can look into what are opportunities thereof. So my global outlook, you know, I often like to repeat this phrase where people say the glass half empty or half full. I say the glass is there. That's a good thing. It's not broken. It's not stolen. We found it. It's there. And I'm happy. One day I'll realize how full it is. But those are some of the things. I mean, the war in Ukraine, the negative, the spin-off, we could get to a point where we renegotiate relations better, you know.
No, I think, yeah, I think you've covered it. And also, I probably would have added Angola, their elections, where, look, depending how you read it, it really was a downfall for I think, their party as well, and obviously Mozambique. So, just maybe a quick 3 questions on what you've said. One, is this the weakest SADC has been? Because if you go back to 2008, the anchor was President Mbeki. Look, ZANU, I think they had manufactured an election outcome where South Africa came in to sort of patch things up, so to speak. But Namibia was solid. SWAPO was always solid. Even now, they're on down, but it's one might argue out of all the former liberation movements, they're probably one of the most solid ones at the moment, even though it's a downward trend. So is this not dangerous at a time when, like you've said, that for you to take on opportunity, you've just spoken about the need for a state and for the system and the having the correct apparatus there. For me, would it be wrong in saying SADC seems unable to do to its instability, and then the region that seems to be on the rise is East Africa?
Yeah, East Africa seems to be on the rise, but we need to understand East Africa, they've been making mistakes way before us. You know, like you need to understand the region very well. When I started working, I traveled a lot to Kenya, to East Africa a lot. And one of the things I noticed about East Africa was they've got a very strong NGO sector, non-government organization sector. They've got problems, of course, civil society. It has been growing there, has been funded and supported. Kenya seems to be moving well. But you remember the elections in the past, you know, not so well, the killings in the past in Kenya. So they've made a lot of mistakes in East Africa. Are they doing well? No, now I cannot say no, a little bit there, but I really would not, I'm not so much persuaded. I mean, if you look at Sahel is also, East Africa get also implicated in that region. You know, it was Central Africa. And Kenya has maintained some level of stability, and Kenya's constitution, I mean, a fabulous constitution. Kenya court, we know what they've done in the previous elections as well. They've had challenges, we know what they've done. Do I see a trend that side? I don't see much of a trend there than I see in this region. Southern Africa, when it comes to trend, I see very interesting developments when it comes to democratic consolidation. And I think the general picture in Southern Africa is actually challenges that are being confronted by liberation parties across, you know. Botswana fascinate me about what is going on, because it shows you that politics has become normal when you have one of the someone descendant of the founding fathers of the liberation parties being the opposition and say, we want to take down this party. Which party is it? That's your father's party. And it shows the level of consolidation that you do have opportunities for the opposition. Don't get carried away, because you have a very long entrenched history of liberation parties here. As much as you see this, we should not get carried away. Just as much as I look at East Africa, I say, don't get carried away. Read the speeches, but also read in between the lines when it comes to the speeches. Kenya's not doing so well on LGBT right inside. So you're talking about the quality of democracy as well, equality and all those things. I'm not saying it's a single point to bring someone down and all, but we need to be looking at the totality to be saying, push human rights. The court is pushing. Can people litigate on this thing? So you still have a lot of work needs to be done. You need to see more competition in politics. Competitive politics need to get to another level. And in this region, in South Africa does have quite very competitive. I mean, the governing party is sitting at a provincial, at union building, is within a municipality that is not run by the governing party, it's run by coalition. I mean, that's the Tshwane. So if you look at that, those are some areas where you see something that says to you, it will, because there is, some people have got the fear that things will fall apart if entrenched governing parties are not in charge. But I think that fear is receding. Dynamism at local government. You do have some challenges. Worried about countries such as Eswatini, for example, of course, in the region. I think discussions have been frozen since the tension. And I don't know how long will they remain frozen, because that's what they are. You can't freeze an issue forever. At some point, you're going to have to attend to how do you deal with the question of opening up the system. You have to find a way to start opening up the system somehow if you don't want it to get to the levels where you don't want. So again, it is a very fragmented, well, the SADC does not look as worse. It has got its own challenges, but looking within the region, it looks relatively stable compared to what you see in other areas in the region. Some people will be proud of Rwanda. I have traveled to Rwanda. I've spent maybe 2-3 weeks in Rwanda. And I remember there was a former Governor Tito Mboweni praised Rwanda about how great it was. And I wrote a piece saying that I don't think you can last 2 weeks there. Probably you spend 2 days, because I cannot imagine Rwanda without Paul Kagame, because there is no system in Rwanda. There is Paul Kagame. That's an individual. And it becomes a problem of succession in that region. So you cannot tell me that region is stable. You cannot tell me that Uganda is stable. No. What do you do after Museveni? Unless otherwise, we have been so defeated by corruption, and we have been so defeated by the imperfections of democracy that we want to start celebrating generals and coup d'etats coming out. I don't feel like that. That is one of the reasons why I still think this region is still quite good. We have no fear of coup d'etats in the region. Let's bring it up. The region is not having a coup, and it has got no risk of coup, except for what is happening in Mozambique. With a question of in Mozambique, we call it skirmishes. You know, it's not a full blow. It's skirmishes. It has a lot to do with the internal strength of the state. It is not a regional issue in that sense. Of course, it has regional implication, but one can say it does not really paint the regional picture. And I think we should, in the region, we should be proud that in this region, despite some of the challenges with some of the elections, despite some of the imperfections, you don't have a military installed government. We almost got there with the ZANU-PF's internal coup, not a long time ago, with the removal of Mugabe there. A little bit of a confusion between the military, what was happening during that time, almost a dark history in the region. But take away that, you've got almost 10 years without any military problem. You can't say the same thing about East Africa. And I think the future of East Africa is very, very, very unpredictable.
And then I think we move, because we've touched on it a bit, which is where most of the issues are happening. The Sahel, is here speaking, your Guinea, Chad.
Yeah.
Basically, the latest iteration the return of the coups. I think they call it the coup belt.
Yeah.
The coup belt now. Just because I think it's always good to contextualize this a bit. I'll give you my analysis, and because obviously we're listening to everybody else, but I think the missing component which they don't want to touch on, and maybe you'll probably enlighten us on, is the genesis. They say is look, the failure of the state to address the jihadists in there. But what I tend to find in the Western analysis is they don't want to acknowledge the removal of Gaddafi and the weapons that made its way down all the way to the Sahel region. So if you'd agree that that's the genesis, and just walk us to there where we now have generals who are 35, 36, and literally ECOWAS, they have got a standby military. They don't have a standby military. If you could just walk us through that region, and also just your experiences of having been there, because it's one of those things where if you're South Africans, you literally think it's very exotic. Because I mean, when we travel, I can do SADC, but then South Africans, if we're honest, we either travel west or we travel east. We don't travel inward.
You know, look, the Sahel is a tough region. I have to say that. I mean, I've traveled there. I've met the young generals. I went to Chad, and in Chad, I got to meet Minister of Finance, and then I also got to meet. I met the Prime Minister actually. When I was in Chad, I got to meet members of cabinet. Interestingly, a Muslim country, Chad, as it is. Interestingly, progressive women in cabinet, very young people in cabinet. I met a 35-year-old minister who was quite incredible. Actually, he was an engineer. I remember, I think they mentioned he studied at MIT or something. He actually invented a very efficient water pump system for the rural areas there. So I had those kind of a discussion within them. But I'll tell you, when I traveled through N'Djamena, which is the capital city of Chad, there are bullet holes on the walls. You can easily paint them out, but the bullet holes were coming from, I think there was the rebels went in around 2012. And I was asking, why are the bullet holes and everything? Said that, no, it's a reminder actually, because it's a reminder why you need a strong military regime there. And that's a problem, because when you are in Chad, it's a militarized place, and a vast land, almost impossible when it comes to security, because when you are in a vast land such as that, and a very horrible land in terms of it's a desert storm and everything, you find it difficult to even land just because of the desert storm. So you have got rebels coming from either side. Remember the border of Chad. You've got Libya. You've got Sudan on the other side. You've got Niger on the other side. I remember when I visited Chad, there was a report that the then President Idris, I think he got shot, got killed by his soldiers after observing military in Niger. When I visited, I remember seeing the motorcade passing by. Usually your Toyota Hilux with some gunners at the back. That's just the way it works. So your Toyota-led cruisers with the gunners at the back. That's a vehicle of choice, that side, with those things. So I see it passing, and the people I was going with, I asked, what's going on? Said, that's how it is. When the president moves, the president moves. It's almost a battalion and a regiment. And he was coming from observing Niger, because Chad has played a bigger role when it comes to holding back that side of Niger, holding back on the side of Niger. But the interesting part about Chad as well is that when you land in Chad, right at the airport is a French military base. You've got French soldiers there guarding the military base there. That's the long-standing military cooperation. I still think they're there now, because it's to a point where that's the runway you're going to land on. Just behind it, you see that is the situation. But it creates an environment where you just cannot imagine stability without strong men. And that is the problem of the Sahel. The Sahel is the issue of strong men. And you start seeing the young generals coming in with very interesting training. I mean, I'll talk about the generals, but I don't want to talk more because I teach at the South African Defense College. I'm a adjunct there. So I get an opportunity to I teach courses on security. So I'm privileged to meet senior officials working in Nigeria, working in Guinea, working in Egypt as part of the people sometimes who will be in my class. And, you know, as someone who traveled to that area, I get fascinated. I get to ask. I get to ask them what is going on about that region. But there is some element of pragmatism around the Sahel that is quite dangerous. And I think it is the pragmatism that says you are going to either get a good soldier who's going to run things, or there will be corrupt politicians. It has become kind of a truism of some sort, because the reality is that the young generals are coming out now. And I've seen a lot of people in South Africa talking about, yeah, it's great. What has happened in Guinea, in Burkina Faso is great. Ibrahim Traore, the 35-year-old coup leader in Burkina Faso, is now being modeled around Thomas Sankara. YouTube videos are flooded with these things, people trying to do that. But we also have our politicians being fascinated that they've done well and they've removed a democratic leader. A democratic leader is removed through elections, people. And the problem with the Sahel, it is a big problem that says you need a benign soldier who's going to be able to do that. You cannot try to reimagine Thomas Sankara today and forget about it. I'm not saying do not use his ideals, but don't try to imagine him in someone. You are just going to perpetuate an unfortunate system. So the young generals are coming out. Those young generals are not beyond reproach. At the center of it is the war on resources, Doc. It's not about it's not about that human right young general saying that. No, it is perpetual. It's just this generation coming out. Mamadou Doumbouya, Kasima, Traore, you name them, Guinea, Mali, and all that. You name this young general, all of them, most of them have had training from Western Special Forces. That's another very interesting aspect of it. Because, I mean, yeah, a very simple example is that the leader of the coup in Mali and the leader of the coup in Mali, if my memory serves well, and the leader of the coup in Guinea have actually met at a training by the Special Forces, by the US Special Forces in Sahel, and also maybe involving other European countries inside. That's how they met. And from there, the other one stage is a coup. And now there is something that we are seeing that worries me. People are not observing this thing. There is collaboration on these coups that is worrying me. You've got Doumbouya saying that, no, I'm not going to allow anyone to go into Burkina Faso, into Niger after the Niger coup. He said that, Doumbouya of Mali. And he's a coup leader. So before, if ECOWAS does not do anything about this thing, or if no one does anything about this thing, you're going to see the phenomenon you have never seen. You're going to see a multi-state coup. Because if you have Mali, you've got Guinea, you've got Burkina Faso, you've got another fourth country into the whole mix. And this one is saying we'll defend this one. And you put into that the Wagner group, PLC.
A vicious group.
Then you've got a nightmare, because once you start tweaking Wagner, you are not tweaking human rights. You're tweaking resources. They don't go out there to entrench human rights. No. You're talking about resources. And what is going on in that region, it is the war on resources. What I'm worrying about, it is its transborder pattern. It is its regional, you can say it is regional mutation of some thoughts coming out. And what I also worry about, it is the way in which those young soldiers are learning how to deal with the public sentiments. They are posting on YouTube. They are all cut and everything. No, they are not Democrats. That's not a Rambo you're seeing there. They are not Democrats. It's a military regime. If you are watching a movie, get over it, put the popcorns aside. There isn't much positive about that thing. And we should stop trying to rationalize. We should stop trying to rationalize on this thing. It never turns out well.
No, just on that though, because two elements I think which you partially touched on. We'll touch on what Wagner is, because look, in terms, since you do military strategy, they are as 21st century as you like, but the exploitation is something else. What one is, and I think maybe this is what they draw very well on, is the anti-sentiment of France. I think France has always done itself I always call it a cancer of Africa. And they've exploited it. And also what you've said, the ability to, like you said, the younger generation who know how to speak the language. And just what does that look like? Because the way you conceptualize it is, if we remember quite correctly, northern Nigeria is not exactly a model of a system. Southern Nigeria, yes. Northern Nigeria, very open to anything, really. So just on that, the French, I think the problem which the French have always caused, and the sentiment, and also what you talked about, the cascading effect. Because if we remember correctly, the biggest, the entrenched power of ECOWAS is Nigeria. And the new president, I call him the grandfather. He seems to want to also make a name for himself, but the question is his army in a position? Because as you mentioned about the coup leaders, these guys have been in war. Well trained by the West. I think one of them was a United Nations peacekeeper.
Some of them, Doumbouya served in the French Foreign Legion.
Yes. So it's just that mess. So if you could just speak on the French, and also the modernity and the Wagner angle, and how Wagner actually operates. Because I think in South Africa, I think romanticize what the USSR and Russia are, but I don't think we quite understand. Wagner is vicious, very vicious in how they operate.
Wagner is very vicious, and I don't know if people remember Blackwater. Blackwater was quite notorious. I don't know if it still exists in that form. And Blackwater, because I want to start there. I want to say Wagner is an aberration of a mercenary gone wrong. You know, it's an aberration in a sense that you have had Blackwater, and one of the things that brought Blackwater down was reporting by journalists about the atrocities. You are Benghazi. You remember in those earlier days, some of the prisoners in the invasion who were humiliated and all these things. And that thing had Blackwater. And why did you have Blackwater? And why did you have private security in the whole thing? It's a very simple thing of having non-state actors. It's a very complex thing, Doc, because you are externalizing the risk of having to account. You are externalizing it by what way? You are bringing a non-state actor into conflict to help you. You are hiring a soldier to help you. That soldier is coming in as a non-state actor, and usually you are bringing that soldier to circumvent due process that is required, accountability in terms of human rights, the United Nations, and of course, for your muscle to be able to get yourself there. But all of this, you have got weaker states, and one of the characters of a weaker state, it is going to always be a weaker army in most cases. And once you start having weaker army, you then start having a tradition of paramilitary groups that are beginning to operate. Wagner started as a paramilitary group, non-state actor, private army. And we call them private army. They are mercenaries. And it's not just Russia that used them only. The US as well has been implicated in the use of mercenaries. The French have got what they call French Foreign Legion. Why do you call it a French Foreign Legion? It is the division of the army where foreigners can serve. Actually, it is almost a ready-made mercenary battalion division, because it's for non-nations and all of that. So why you are having all of this thing, highly trained soldier, motivated, quick missions, in and out, small groups that don't move in big thing, high infantry, high returns on missions, and no problems with accountability, by the way, because the mercenaries at home, some of them may just be known as security guards. wherever they're doing or everything. And they don't arrive back in body bags. One thing about the war that you must always know is that nobody likes to receive people in body bags. So once your soldiers start dying, you are bringing them back in body bags, you are putting them on a flag, you are losing the war at home. So how do the mercenaries help? You are externalizing that one. It's almost like so it's simple. You are just outsourcing that part of it. But the problem is that in Africa, it is becoming bigger than your principal army now. You see? You see, if you are a maybe Western nation, you can have a mercenary, put it under your control. I'm not saying it's acceptable, but at least we can even control it. Let me give you a very simple example that for me, it worried me a lot. I mean, if Wagner could, out of disgruntlement, move just less than 200 miles into Moscow, maybe 380 kilometers, 360, what will they do if they get upset with an African leader who has just did not deliver well on their thing? It's a time bomb. Actually, what that means is that you can have a coup once every month. That's why you have a coup within a coup. Because just when things don't go well, the soldiers are willing to say, okay, who's the highest bidder? You've got resources around this thing. And that is how the Wagner is. What worries me a lot about the Wagner, other countries are using mercenary, but not so brazen. They don't call a conference and say, here is our legion of mercenaries. They don't do that. The problem with the Wagner, for me, is that we have to deal with the human rights implications of our foreign policy as well. Because if Wagner is a chief principle or is a chief tool when it comes to Russia's foreign policy, and we've got the relationship that we have with Russia, and look at how this thing is coming to bite you. Wagner is back home because he's being implicated in the coup leaders in Niger have made it very clear to ECOWAS that you come here, we will ask help. And they are going to ask help from whom? They might ask help from Wagner. In one of the coups, I think it was in Mali, I think they were saying the Wagner flag or whatever paraphernalia was part of, they raised it. So it is a very, very complex situation. And the United Nations article is very clear against the employment, use, giving corridor, supporting, giving supply, abetting is super extensive. And the OAU convention, I think it was written by the time it was the African Union. It is very clear on the mercenary, because if there is any region that has been a victim of mercenary, it's Africa. So we cannot stand by and claim neutrality on some of these things. They're just coming to our doorstep. So Wagner need to be understood within that. It's I'm worried about those who can trust such formations to stay in power to start with.
Governing with a gun to your head. Yeah. No, and then obviously we can't ignore the French in all of this, because I think we've spoken about Wagner, about what Russia is.
Yeah.
Just France and their look, as I said, I've always called them a cancer. Just if you look at I'm trying to think of a successful post-colonial state in Africa from France, it's just how do we put them into this where, like you said, it's a natural outlet to, because I saw the population. That's what I also found very dangerous. That populations were happy to see the French go, but like you said, who they welcome, we've spoken about. But just the French, and how does the African continent deal with that going forward? Where I think France does need to exit, but this vacuum, if you could just touch on that a bit.
France does need to exit. No doubt about it. And it is culpable, a greater deal, responsible for a lot of challenges in the Sahel, history, And when you look at the situation now, if you travel to that side, I think, and you speak to an observer there, they might be scared about the withdrawal of France as well, because that is just a jihadist ally, that side. I mean, the French people are not there to stabilize democracy. That train is gone. It's not that there's no democracy to stabilize there. And what you are looking at is purely security reasons. And fighting against the jihadists. It's just the most important thing. Mali, that area, Al-Shabaab in that area, some element of ISIS in that area. You really, if the French are out and you are replacing the French with the Russians, what are you going to achieve? Shouldn't we be thinking about the regional strategy here? I mean, don't you just need the regional force to be able to do that? UNESCO of some sort. And the regional force, if you need it, you're gonna need a lot of money to it. It can be a collaborative force. The picture has to change. It cannot be the way it were. And I also don't think a sudden withdrawal of the French will help. It will be catastrophic as well. Because at this point, they're the ones that have got the intelligence about that side. They're the ones that have been operating in that region. They're the ones that understand the know-how of what is going on in that region. So the sudden withdrawal and expectations that a few coup leaders are going to stabilize the regime, the region. No. We've seen what happens with the coup within a coup. That's what happens in that side.
So, again, for those that are listening, welcome to the TK Show. Our guest is Dr. Ralph Mathekga, who really is just he's given us firstly, the technicalities of what it means to work in government and for government to operate. And then he's just given us a tour de force of SADC, East Africa, and now we are, I think, the most popular area in Africa, which is the coup belt. Just on this one then, Doc, before we move to a different part, how does ECOWAS address this? If you're sitting there as an advisor, because, again, if you send the army in and they lose, that is bad. That's a bad signal. If they go in and win, how your own population receives this, because the way I foresee it is eventually ECOWAS, the standing army, will have to ask the French to help, which then creates its own issues.
It actually it proves the point of those young generals that you see they are bringing that. I think it was hasty of ECOWAS to propose a definite solution at that point.
Yeah,
you need to be diplomatic. I mean, you buy time, and you do not promise the force that you cannot meet, especially when you are confronted with a situation like that, because the deadline has actually passed. Because remember, they've given the coup leaders of Niger the deadline to release a president there. The deadline has passed, and what are you going to do? Are you going to invade? I really think that you need multilateral action. You can't go there alone. And again, it's just going to be a civil war. Remember, ECOWAS soldiers are soldiers from that side. And it's a civil war. You are actually marching nations into civil war and also intra. I mean, it's going to be quite difficult. I really think, what do you need to do? You need to de-escalate. And are you going to accept there is a coup? Of course. I mean, where have you seen a coup being reversed? Let's just be practical about it. What are you going to do about it? What is the most practical thing you can? Reverse a coup. The best you can do is to push them to call elections earlier than they said they will.
So diplomacy at the end of the day.
There is a way out. The problem is that the lack of diplomacy, promising the force that you cannot meet. And in my view here, you have to start engaging the coup leaders. You have to reset the constitutional mandate. If you allow the constitutional mandate to remain broken too long, that's a problem. And understand, you cannot go by force. There are too many multi-forces there. So the best way, talk to the coup leaders, have elections as soon as possible, have them have some take off their uniforms and wear suits if possible. De-escalate this thing.
No, I think that's actually wonderful. I think it's probably the analysis which is missing in South Africa, because I think you've really broken the region quite well. Just 3 more points to touch on, because I think we'd be remiss if we don't jump to the UK and the US, where elections and how's that? I think let's start at the UK, where Mr. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister Sunak, doesn't look like he'll be coming back next year, or are we calling it too early?
No one comes back there. Like, the UK is a very interesting case that government can actually function on autopilot. Maybe if the institutions are stronger, if institutions are more stable, you can have that rotation, but government can function. You know what? The change of leadership in the UK seems like no longer to be that deeply meaningful. And for me, is it good? Is it bad? Maybe the system is just where they want it. They've got a lot of crises, no doubt about it. They've got some challenges, and I don't think they should be much worried, to be honest with you. I think that when I look at it now, they've gone through a lot. They've survived Johnson. I mean, nobody comes back. There is more fragmentation within that. I mean, will Labour become strong and come back? I don't think so. I really think that the next government will also not last too long. The UK, the US is the one that is more of a leadership change, could change a lot of things.
I think you've moved there already. Has Biden done
fascinating there?
Has President Biden done enough to say he can convince Americans to stave off another Trump term, or because I guess he has a bit of, but I say he's probably a bit more cunning than President Ramaphosa in that he's allowed his enemies to have a go at him, even within his own party, the Democrat Party, but he just seems to be getting month on month stronger and stronger. And is that enough then to stave off one internal, because I think they still have to have their own internal candidate, the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And then eventually next year, do you think he's done enough?
The Democrats find themselves in a very difficult position. It's unheard of to dump the president midstream, in the middle of from one term to another. You are just weakening your own position. If you're the Democrat, they're going to have to go with Biden, in my view. But man, he's also quite elderly. Yeah, he's also quite elderly there. And he's going against a man who has lots and lots of energy. Lots and lots of energy. Lots. Donald Trump is in a win it or lose it all. We know when a man is being pushed to that position where he's going to fight it all out. I mean, and the problem with Donald Trump is that he's got a way to surprise. I'm looking at Joe Biden in relation to, can he hold up against Trump? Trump has got almost a plethora of charges facing him. And that's what he wants sometimes. There is a person who will relish. When he was elected, I don't know, when was he elected? I was actually in Washington. We had discussions with colleagues in the newspapers. I think it was
2018. Yeah, around 2018.
Yeah, I had a discussion with journalists. I visited DC there. And in our discussion, a lot of people, Americans, were so sure about Trump was going to lose. Why? Because they were looking at their politics in their lens of what is normal. And I said to them, I'm from South Africa. He's going to win. They said, what do you mean? I said, he doesn't have to say anything. He's an anti-establishment president. So, a lot of problems why anti-establishment people will win is how people can be jaded with the system. Disenchantment. People feeling like mainstream does not represent me. There are a lot of people who are just taking the corrupt elites. In the USA, it's almost like the corrupt democratic elites who are under the spell of big farm money, if you like. And that thing can easily help one build an anti-establishment ticket. And Trump is on that. If he loses, it's not going to be... I think if he loses, it's going to be quite close. I won't rule him out. And it's not because he has got a clear, discernible project. It's the level of disenchantment. Americans came out of the COVID economy, interest rates and everything, the economy not doing so well, the post-COVID, the whole disenchantment going on. it's what Trump talks about usually, that it is not working. They don't care what's going to work. They're not going to ask him whether his program is going to work. So it is that sense of anti-establishment is what I'm worried about the most. And he's good at it. And a lot of people look at his project expecting to identify some substance in it. But I said the point is that he does not want to hook himself to any substance. You just have that anti-establishment project and you win the election. I'm worried about Joe Biden's energy. Maybe at the end of the day, why don't Kamala Harris run? Why? Well, it's very strange to run against you, especially if he's running. It is a very strange, but I think it would have been bad. It's an unimaginable picture, but maybe going with Harris might have been different. I don't know. I don't see Biden pulling it off with this energy. It's going to be a difficult uphill battle for him.
No, interesting take. And then I think as we move towards closer, we now come back home, where we've just been told that the opposition, well, it's interesting, I think only 3 of the parties that were at Kempton Park have actually run in a national election. So call it what you will. It was. But apparently they have now come together and they all now have a common united front. Just your take on, first, the understanding, have people, because I think what I'm picking up from how you analyze things is you almost seem to always say, look, let's get rid of the pomp and the newspaper stuff and actually look at it soberly. This it's almost as though people self-prophecy that this ANC is going away. As though, just how do your take on that people have just written off the ANC and that there will be a coalition, and because they've had Kempton Park, everything is going into 2020. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's that.
I'll tell you, I believe the ANC is gone already, but in a very different way than people say. I mean, I had this discussion with some of my colleagues in another forum. They were saying to me, what's going to happen in 2024? The ANC, when it loses power, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? How is the system going to be? And, I said to them that you guys are worried about where you are already. What's your problem? They said, what do you mean? I said, the last 3-4 legislation in parliament, the ANC has had a problem passing it. Why? Because of the numbers and because of the popularity here and there. You remember the bill around the expropriation? There was a bill that opposition shot down in the legislation, sometimes late last year. You've got your employment equity bill that runs into problem here and there. What are we looking at? We're looking at a system where the ANC will no longer pass policy on its own. That is already there now. The strong opposition now, of course, is still within the ANC. I'm not even talking about differences within the ANC. Let me start with differences within the ANC. First point, those differences themselves have restrained policy progress, have held policy back a little bit within the ANC. Now you are going to add to that the declining majority of the ANC. That's external factors, that is other parties now. We are there already, because all we need to understand is that the absence of the ANC just simply means the ANC might still be part of the coalition, but it will just have to canvass to get legislation and policy to be passed. That is almost already the case, where the party's grand hold on policy is out. It can no longer go it alone. The age of unilateralism when it comes to policy is gone. But I think a lot of South Africans are worried about the anxiety. They want the curtain to fall. The curtain as in an announcement that says the ANC is down. But you and I, we can observe in terms of the functioning of the state policy already that there is a heavy contest of the policy, that you've got to do more work. Actually, even more interestingly, if you don't even do more work on policy, I can even go to court and reevaluate it on the basis of administration law and so forth. So we have a contested policy space, and it's becoming normal. All of this thing is saying you are going to have more involvement per decision than it has been the case before. Is that tragic? Not in the world I come from. All you have to do is to bring institutions to process those decisions. Have institutionalized coalition partners. They must have a clear mandate. They must know what it means to have a concession. They must know what it means to exchange on the issues. Today, I'm giving you a concession on this budget item. Next week, there is my issue, which is primary to my constituents. I want to help on the legislation. That's how democracy works. I don't see coalition as tragic. Those who see coalition tragic is because they are too much vested in a single party dominant system. Yeah.
No, that's quite an interesting take. And yeah, maybe I probably am one of those. I'm more of a believer. I'm more of a pragmatist than a Democrat. So I tend to move in that way. But just on the point which doesn't actually get raised, or there's a colleague who always used to say, and I think you're also raising it a bit, is the fascination, even analysis, even in academia and in the newspapers on the ANC has almost done a disservice to citizens towards us understanding what is the makeup of the opposition. We really don't know what. Yes, we have. I think we have an inclination of what the Democratic Alliance is because they use the Western Cape as a template, and Inkatha, owing to the history of KwaZulu, the older generation in KZN have that history of saying, well, administratively KwaZulu was strong. It's just that politics were a bit different, for lack of a better word. Just in terms of generationally, not age-wise, just generation of what you're talking about, generation of competence and understanding government. Do you think these opposition leaders are there? They'll make mistakes, given it's not because, the NC has been making mistakes, but just do you think this is the generation of opposition that really, as you put it, brings a type of competition which is positive both for the economy, for direction of the country, or do you see us going through more growth pains in order for us to get towards this place of where competition is effective? Because there's also, not all competition is positive.
Yeah. Let's not be too hard on ourselves. We are quite young as a democracy. We build against the history of deep tensions with institutions involving protest as the only method of engagement in the past under apartheid. So we are evolving as a country. So I don't want to shoot down opposition. Now, I'll give you a simple example. There are other opposition parties whose ideas I find not sound. I'm polite. But I respect them. You know why? Because they occupy an opposition space. That is a moral position. I don't have to agree with you to respect you as an opposition. And if I respect your space as an opposition, and I'm helping you to define that space, you can react and do whatever, but at the end of the day, you are going to be an opposition the way I want one day. So we have got the principle of opposition politics is entrenched, is becoming entrenched, let me say, in South Africa. And it's a positive thing. What we need is the quality of opposition. And I was talking to Business Day yesterday, and I was talking to a journalist, and I said, I'm thrilled. South Africa has got a pre-election coalition talk, because that's what I've been writing about. It doesn't have to be perfect. All it does is to say to the opposition, we acknowledge we might not win on our own. Cooperation is what we need to do. And that is quite positive in any democracy. So we've got weaker opposition, we've got stronger opposition in South Africa, but we've got an opposition, and people don't get killed by being in opposition parties. So for me, that's a great development, and a lot of people will be surprised. I'm an optimist. I'm a big optimist.
No, Dr. Ralph Mathekga, thank you so utterly much. It's actually giving us a lot of your time. And like I said, you've literally given us a tour de force of, as I said, from SADC, East Africa, the coup belt, the UK, America, and back home to what's just happened with, as you said, the movement towards opposition. And most important, I think the way you framed to say that the moment where you can say, listen, I don't have all the answers, and you might have an answer. Let's look there. Just any closing words for our listeners and viewers? Anything which we should keep an eye out from you?
I think that to your viewers, they should not worry. They should not allow anxiety about the coalition. And coalitions are imperfect, but they can be used perfectly. That's what I have to say.
Well, Doc, thank you so much again for your time. And to those who have been paying attention to our show, thank you very much. The TK Show, where we try to bring those conversations which you have in your head with friends and family to bring it to a panel of experts just to hear what they have to say. And I love the way Dr. Mathekga kind of rounded off by saying, listen, at the end of the day, let's not be anxiety. Let's look at it long term. And I always say this, and I think it's becoming part and parcel more of how South Africans view it. I like traveling across the world, but this is home, and we have to make this work, not just for ourselves, but also for the region as well. Thank you very much for your time, Doc.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us on all your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, please join our Substack community via the link in the comments below. And as always, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future guests and conversation topics.